All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight here at The Volume. Happy Thursday, everybody. Hope all of you guys are having a great week so far. Got a jam-packed show for you today. We're going to hit the showdown between Chet Holmgren and Victor Wembanyama yesterday, talk a little bit about the Thunder to this point in the season at large. And then after that, we're going to do a deep dive into the Cleveland Cavaliers, who are 5-0, have the number one offense in the NBA, and three significant changes to the way they play compared to last year that we're going to break down. Then also, we have a mailbag at the tail end of the show. Got about a half dozen questions. We're going to be hitting some of the other teams around the league. You guys know the drill. Before we get started, subscribe to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel so you don't miss any more of our videos. Follow me on Twitter at _JasonLT so you guys don't miss show announcements. Don't forget about our podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts under Hoops Tonight. Don't forget, it's also helpful if you leave a rating and a review on that front. And then last but not least, keep dropping mailbag questions in those YouTube comments. I'm going to try to get to at least one mailbag a week over the course of the season. We're going kind of short on today's mailbag just because I'm in a little bit of a time crunch, but I'm going to try to get to a good-sized mailbag at least once a week. All right, Spurs-Thunder. So from the opening tip, Chet and Wemby were going at it. There was a kind of a set play where they were trying to get a lob to get Wemby towards the rim, and Chet just swatted it off the glass and then turned around and walled up on Jeremy Sohan at the rim and had a defensive play. Victor Wembanyama took like a pretty aggressive step back three over Chet. And a little bit later in the first half, Chet tried to like throw a lob off the glass to himself to look for the highlight of the century on Victor Wembanyama, which I admire the ambition. But, really Chet just kicked his ass. Wemby was being aggressive too, but he's just not playing very well yet to start this year. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But Oklahoma City was consistently guarding him with power wings instead of putting Chet on him. So like Jalen Williams started the game on him, a lot of Alex Caruso when he came off the bench. Like the idea there is we can't contest you up high, so why don't we bother you down low, right? And there's actually a mailbag question I have today that gets a little deeper into this concept of attacking the base or attacking the basketball to try to disrupt rhythm rather than trying to contest shots up top. And when it comes to Victor in particular, he's struggling right now because he's a little thin, struggles to maintain his base, and he hasn't been very strong with the ball this year. This is something I've talked about a few times on the show, the idea of Victor just kind of like losing control of the basketball by exposing it and people being able to easily knock it away. This was something that happened a lot to Dirk Nowitzki, if you guys remember, in the early part of his prime, where teams basically were like, instead of putting centers on this guy or big old power forwards, why don't we try guarding him with wings and try to get up underneath him, disrupt his base, and attack the pocket, right? And if you guys remember, the way that Dirk became really good at beating that specific type of defensive strategy was he got really good at fighting for position so he could get his catches where he wanted. He became very strong with the ball. And again, that's where it's like I talked about earlier, instead of exposing the basketball, everything's tight and close to the chest, two hands on the ball, being very strong with the basketball to prevent being stripped, and then deadly over the top shooting. So if he ever got a little bit of space with a jab, or if the dude did give him a little bit of space, he could very quickly get up into a shooting pocket and get a shot off. And then lastly, leveraging body position for drives. He would just feel which shoulder you're on and he would spin off, or he'd do a quick rip in a certain direction. And so he actually got very, very good at scoring against smaller defenders. And that was what kind of unlocked that later phase of his prime where he became one of the most dominant scorers in the league. And so that's going to be a coverage that I think Victor is going to deal with a lot here early on as teams are testing his ability to maintain his base and to take care of the basketball. And he's just going to have to get so much better at those specific details to counter that. Chet is just, in general, so much further along in his development than Victor Wembanyama. The gap between a 20-year-old and a 22-year-old on the basketball court is probably the largest 2-year development gap in the sport. That's when you really start to grow into your body and become stronger. And also, it's like your first experience playing against real pros. That's when you learn, right? Like, Chet has an extra year of NBA strength and conditioning under his belt. He has an extra year of working out with pros. Like, he spent an entire summer working out with KD. He's just a better basketball player right now. And that's to be expected. But obviously Victor has a chance to close that gap. But Chet kicked his ass yesterday because Chet's a better player. Obviously Oklahoma City's a better team. But at this phase, like, Chet is playing better basketball right now. Victor, there's all this potential. There's all this upside that he can get to. And I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the season, Victor starts to more accurately represent what we expect from him. This is everyone's capable of having a bad 4-game stretch, right? Like everyone's capable of that. But Chet right now just looks a little bit older, a little bit more developed. And I thought that was on display in the game last night. Chet's defending at a preposterously high level right now. He's averaging 5 stocks per game. He's being way more physically aggressive this year, leveraging his athletic gifts, especially in transition. He runs the floor super, super well. Remember, that was how he beat Jokic in the first game of the season, just by running him up and down the floor. 27% of Chet's points to this point in the year have come in transition. The Thunder are also clearly allowing him to be more aggressive in their offense. His usage rate is up 5% from last year. A lot more opportunity to run action in the half court. He's running about 3 pick and rolls, ISOs, and post-ups per game, including passes this year. That's up about 20% from what he was doing last year. He did struggle to shoot the ball in the first 2 games of the year, but he's 6 for 8 from 3 over the course of his last 2 games. And the big one is he's doing so much better attacking closeouts. When he catches on the perimeter and he's got a bigger guy closing out at him, he's doing such a nice job of beating that guy off the dribble and making quick scoring moves. Last year, Chet converted spot-up opportunities at 1.03 points per possession. This year, he's doing it at 1.54 points per possession. Now, it obviously won't stay that high, but he's been so much better at scoring with an advantage so far this year. Simple moves with simple counters. There was a couple plays in the Spurs game that I thought demonstrated this. Drove right, got cut off, kind of just quickly pivoted over his right shoulder, made a little short 7-footer in the lane. Simple concept, right? Hard drive to the right, cut me off, I'm going to make a counter move. There was another play where he was going downhill at Zach Collins, and Zach Collins was really on his heels and overplaying Chet's right-hand drive. And so Chet just went into a hard spin move and then right up to the basket with his left hand and finished. That was something he struggled with last year, just quick scoring moves off the dribble that he's doing really, really well to start this year. Remember, spacing is not just about making threes. It's about off-ball scoring. It's about taking an advantage and turning it into points. Everyone thinks that just means knocking down a shot off the catch. It can mean so many different things in terms of maintaining your threat off the ball. If you never take a catch and shoot 3, but you manage to successfully turn every catch at the 3-point line into points somehow, you're still providing spacing because teams are not going to want to leave you open for that specific reason, right? Obviously, it's a combination of all those different things, but Chet's just doing a really nice job driving closeouts this year. Now, again, this is all very small sample size. Chet has been playing, though, so far this year at right around that kind of top 15 level. He's averaging 23 points and 11 rebounds on 66% true shooting with truly elite rim protection and some real defensive versatility. 5 stocks per game with his super low foul rate. He's committing just 2.6 fouls per 36 minutes. He's been one of the best two-way players in the league this year. Now, again, we'll see how it goes over the large sample. I do think Victor is going to be a better player than Chet in the long run, but Chet is playing better basketball to start this year, and he's playing better basketball, not just than Wemby, but than a lot of players in the NBA that I had ranked above him coming into the season. I'm really, really curious to see how well he can maintain that, because if he can maintain that level of play, we're talking about a really dangerous team and a team that presents some specific issues to a team like the Boston Celtics if they were to meet in the NBA Finals. Looking around the rest of the roster, Shea's off to a rough start this year, but it's mostly because of his jump shot. He looks just as quick and dynamic off the bounce as ever, if not even a bit more so. But he's really trying to build up this pull-up 3 part of his game. To give you a basic idea of how much he's really trying to add this to his game, last year he took about 2.5 pull-up 3s per game. This year he's taken about 6.5. So he's basically doubling his pull-up 3-point shot volume, and he's experiencing some growing pains as he tries to build that out. I've talked about this on the show before, but there's a process to adding something to your game as a basketball player, and each step of the process comes with a part where it looks ugly. So for instance, starts with alone in the gym. You're in the gym with a rebounder, taking step-back 3s, taking off the dribble 3s, right? At first, it's going to look ugly, but eventually you're going to get really good at it, and you're going to be like, okay, I think I'm ready to try this against a defender. Then you start working one-on-ones. And you're working that same step back three or that high hesitation three, going left and right, whatever the combinations you're working on. And there will be a phase where it looks ugly against defense because that defender is going to be disrupting your rhythm and doing all these little things to make it harder on you, right? But eventually you're going to get really good at that. Then the next phase is like in practice when you're playing 5-on-5 and testing it there. And there's going to be a phase where it looks ugly because it's different than what you're used to doing in the flow of 5-on-5 games, right? But eventually you get to the point where you're really good at it, and then you start trying to leverage it in actual games. But even then, there's usually a phase at the beginning where it's like, I'm trying this new move, I'm trying this new thing, I'm doing it in games, and it's not working right now, but you have to stick with it. And I think that's just kind of part of the process here. Like a lot of guys for the Spurs or for the Thunder are trying to increase their pull-up three-point volume. Jalen Williams basically doubling his pull-up three-point volume. There's been some growing pains there, right? Like that's kind of part of that journey. I don't really get concerned about it until you start to enter into that Jason Tatum territory where it's like, okay, now we have 3 consecutive full seasons of him being pretty bad at pull-up jump shooting, and yet he's still trying. But even then, here we are this year, albeit very small sample size, but Tatum's getting 1.22 points per pull-up jump shot so far this year. So if it comes together and it turns into a reliable thing for him in the long run, like I would argue even the 3 years of him being a bad pull-up shooter were worth it, right? So like it's all part of investing in long-term skill development. It's clear that that's what Shea is working on. Jalen Williams, same sort of thing. He's just 11 for 38 on jump shots this year. By the way, the Thunder as a team are really struggling to shoot the ball, which we'll get to in a second. But the Jalen Williams struggling to make jump shots. He's also doubled his pull-up three-point shot volume, and he's not making them right now. But he's been so good in so many other ways. Like he's rebounding super well this year. He's averaging 6 assists per game here in the early part of the season. I'm not worried about Jalen in the long run. And again, you're 4-0. That's the scary thing about all of this. Like they're not shooting well and they're 4-0. And to me, it's mostly about shot selection. They're actually shooting over 40% on unguarded catch and shoot jump shots. And they're getting 1.21 points per attempt in those situations, which is great, right? But they have several guys working on their pull-up jump shots, and their pull-up jump shots are not going in right now. And they're taking a lot of contested catch and shoot threes that are not going in. They've taken 50 contested catch and shoot threes this season, and they're shooting just 22% on them. I do think they'll be fine in the long run. But the real story of this game, the thing that really stood out to me, just watching the Spurs and the Thunder play, is just the gap in young talent. Like the Thunder just have so many good young players in their system. We talked about Jalen Williams. We talked about Chet Holmgren. We talked about gilgeous-alexander, right? But like Aaron Wiggins is like a rock solid 3-and-D wing with some real off the dribble pop. And again, he's another guy that's not shooting the three well to start the year, but he's a career 39% three-point shooter. I'm not worried about it. Kason Wallace, just a really good ball pressure guard. Like Kason Wallace sparked the run at the end of that Atlanta game. If you guys remember, Atlanta took a lead on an offensive rebound putback in the early fourth quarter, and then Kason Wallace really started to get up in Trae Young's jersey and forced a couple of back-to-back turnovers. They started to get out in transition, and they blew that game open immediately, in large part because of Kason Wallace's ball pressure. He also can shoot the ball extremely well. He's also a guy that can really score well on rolls to the rim or cuts to the rim. He can shoot the ball really well. He's a good screen setter. Like there's so many different things that Kason Wallace does really well. Isaiah Joe shoots the seams off the basketball. AJ Mitchell, the latest rookie for Oklahoma City to look good in their system, had 12 points and 2 steals last night. It's just this like one after the other of like really good, interesting young players that are coming up through Oklahoma City's system. Meanwhile, you juxtapose it with the Spurs' young talent, and there just doesn't seem to be nearly as many exciting options. Like I like Devin Vassell. I'm really excited to see what he can do when he gets back on the floor this year. But like, you know, we'll see. It remains to be seen if he has that all-star upside. That's probably the biggest swing factor in the Spurs' development over the next few years. I like Jeremy Sohan as a versatile forward, and he's putting up some solid box score numbers, but I have a hard time figuring out where Jeremy Sohan fits in a good NBA offense. And I know that sounds absurd. He's averaging, 19 points a game on 50% shooting or something like that this year, but it's in the context of a bad offense. And that's where it gets tricky because he really can't shoot and he really can't make contested shots around the rim. So it's hard for me to envision him having like an easy role in a really good offense. Like even if you're a great dirty work player that can do all these different things, like we've just seen how many times over the course of NBA history, these types of forwards get completely ignored by good defenses in high leverage situations. It's still early. We'll see what happens in the long run, but the context of Jeremy Sohan scoring right now is not something that I think fits into a good offense, and that's something that concerns me. Other young guys like Trey Jones, he's fine, good player, right? Like Keldon Johnson, good athlete. With him, it's the kind of like feel for the game stuff that's always bothered me. But like Malachi Branham, Julian Champagnie, Stephon Castle, who's just struggling to shoot the ball to start this year. But like none of those guys are really popping the way that Oklahoma City's guys are popping. And that's like directly manifesting in how easy it is for Oklahoma City to win basketball games. The offensive end is just so bad for the Spurs. They have a 104 offensive rating. Only the Jazz have been worse. They can't shoot the ball. They're not a good ball handling team. They're not a good feel for the game team. Chris Paul hasn't helped the offense much at all. He just doesn't threaten the defense enough as a scorer to really get defenses to react to him. He's not setting up Victor Wembanyama with the quality opportunities I was hoping he would. The Spurs have just a 101 offensive rating with CP3 on the floor. They've actually been better with him off the floor. So, like, I'm just really curious to see what this all looks like in 2 to 3 years. Like, who among this group does the front office view as foundational pieces next to Victor Wembanyama? I'm really curious to see. Devin Vassell, again, is going to be the big swing factor to see where this team can get to. And again, on the Wemby front, all about strength and shooting. Strength in his base, strength with the basketball, and really working on it looks like he's clearly trying to become a perimeter scorer. That seems to be his approach to the game. But right now, he just doesn't shoot the ball well enough. And again, anybody can play poorly for 4 games. Let's give it some time. I ranked Victor Wembanyama 18th in my player rankings before the season because I obviously view him substantially better than what he has shown to this point. But he's just not playing well, and right now the Spurs look like a bad basketball team, and I'm curious to see how that shapes out over the course of the rest of the season. Does your favorite NBA player have what it takes to be crowned king of the court? Find out at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. DraftKings is offering $1 million a day in bonus bets for the first 10 days of the NBA season. That's $10 million in bonus bets. Here's how you shoot your shot. Opt in and get a daily NBA profit boost token. Pick a pregame NBA player prop to boost, and if that player leads the league that night in points plus rebounds plus assists, you win a share of the $1 million in bonus bets. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code HOOPS. That's HOOPS. That's code HOOPS to win a share of $1 million in bonus bets if your player is king of the court. Only on DraftKings, the crown is yours. All right, let's move on to the Cleveland Cavaliers. 5-0 to start the year. The first 3 games were against some bad teams, so I was waiting to see what they looked like against a tougher stretch of their schedule. But then they went into New York and they beat the Knicks with a really impressive late third quarter, early fourth quarter run. And then they beat the living shit out of the Lakers last night. Lakers fans, if you want to hear what I thought about their side of that game, I have a couple of thoughts about it that I'm going to share in the mailbag. So just kind of hang out towards the end. But there are 3 main differences that I'm noticing between this year's Cleveland Cavaliers team and last year's Cavaliers team. The first one is the obvious one. They are playing so much faster. They're trying to leverage misses and turnovers into fast break basketball. And again, it's just a very basic on a very basic level. It's the concept that you know how like I talked about the king of the court concept with my high school kids and the idea of like how much more efficient they are scoring the basketball when a defender is sprinting at them versus when a defender is standing in a stance in front of them. Like that is a simple mathematical concept where it's like, we want to try to avoid as many of these one-on-one situations with a set defender as possible. And we want to create as many opportunities with the defender sprinting at our offensive players as possible. We want to create as many of those advantage situations as possible because on a very mathematical level, we just score more points per opportunity in those situations than when we're going against a set defense. That same concept translates to transition basketball. Every NBA team is substantially more efficient in transition than they are in the half court. And so every opportunity you have to get out in transition, you need to take advantage of it. Now, there's a personnel element to it. If you don't have fast players, you're not going to do a ton of scoring in transition, right? Like the defense will just beat you back and then you'll end up inefficient in transition and that will defeat the purpose, right? But like if you have the personnel to run, you should look to run as much as possible. And if you are not, you are missing on an opportunity to build margin within your basketball team. And again, like this is something that JB Bickerstaff was just not capitalizing on. This is a team that should be running. Jared Allen, mobile for a big. Evan Mobley, one of the most mobile bigs in the league. Garland, Mitchell, these guys are fast. They have speed. They should be playing fast, and they just weren't. Here are a couple of stats to demonstrate just how much of a difference Kenny Atkinson has made in the transition play for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Last year, they were 8th in pace. Last year they were 24th in pace. This year they're 8th in pace. Last year they were 12th in fast break points scored. This year they are 3rd in fast break points scored. Last year they were 17th in total transition points scored per game. This year they're 5th in total transition points scored per game. Last year they were 7th in transition efficiency. This year they are 2nd in transition efficiency. So top 10 across the board and top 5 for the most part in every transition offense category when they were a middle to below average team in the pack of NBA teams last year in those categories, just by simply changing their approach. And again, this is a concept I've been talking about a ton on this show. The base level of basketball is half-court offense. And the reason why I focus on that so much is that when you get to the later phases of the playoffs, everybody's good. So it's harder to gain to gain ground on the margins because everybody's well coached. Everybody plays super hard. Everybody is sharp and disciplined. And so then like those half-court battles become so much more important. But in the large sample, when you're playing 82 games and especially when you're looking for opportunities to make quick work of lesser playoff teams in the early rounds, this is where building margin can help. How do you build margin? Win on the specific details that are outside of that half-court basketball. Are you winning in transition on offense? Are you winning in transition on defense? Like, are you getting back, right? Like, are you generating extra possessions on the offensive glass? Are you generating transition opportunities and extra possessions off of turnovers? Like all of these different things that you can do in the game that build margin, right? And like this is a classic example of like this was a mediocre offense last year. Now they're the number one offense in the league. And there's another concept we're going to talk about with Evan Mobley in a minute, but a big part of that is they're just getting easier opportunities in transition as much as they possibly can, which is something that JB Bickerstaff was just not taking advantage of. 2, on defense, they are doing a lot more switching. Kenny Atkinson was an assistant with the Warriors for a while before this, and Steve Kerr has been a huge proponent of switching. Was one of the original guys in the league that really leaned into it a lot, right? So like it's not hard to believe why Kenny Atkinson has kind of taken that ideology into Cleveland. But specifically what Steve Kerr is a proponent of is switching, containing the ball with limited help, in playing passing lanes instead of overhelping. Why? Because, yeah, you're going to have possessions where you give up a bucket in a one-on-one situation. But if that guy contains the basketball and forces him to pick up his dribble, then he's got to turn and start pivoting around and looking for places to throw the ball. When everyone's in a passing lane, instead of overhelping, those passing reads aren't there. And a lot of times, especially if the on-ball defender starts poking at the ball and starts pressuring, that guy will rush a pass. And that is when you're in the passing lane and you force a turnover and you start to get out in transition. He has brought that same philosophy. Kenny Atkinson has brought that same philosophy to the Cavs, and it's been a huge boost for them. Last year, they were forcing the 18th most turnovers in the league. This year, they're forcing the 4th most turnovers in the league, and they are number 1 in the entire NBA so far in points off of turnovers per game, where last year they were 12th. Again, if you switch and you contain and you play passing lanes, you start to get deflections and turnovers. That's when you get out in transition. The Lakers game was a classic example of this. They forced 6 turnovers in the first quarter and scored on every single one of them, and 5 of them were threes. They had 17 points in a single quarter just off the strength of their defense, forcing turnovers and running the floor. 17 points. That's a huge boost to any offense. So 1, playing in transition as much as possible. 2, more switching, which is allowing them to force more turnovers. And then 3, much more involvement of Evan Mobley in the offense. This is a concept we actually talked about when we talked some Cavs. Was it on Monday this week? Yeah, I think it was on Monday this week.
Did you say that again?
Not talking to you, Watch. That was in the Monday show when we did the stock rising, stock falling. I talked about Evan Mobley's on-ball creation. We did some film in that one as well. But the general, like, kind of quick synopsis of it, I did a real deep dive on it earlier this week. But the basic concept there is Evan Mobley's being guarded by a forward who typically doesn't have to navigate screens, and guard setting screens the guard defender is now navigating as a screen defender, which is something that guards don't typically need to do. And for the most part, teams are going to hedge in situations like that. So if they don't hedge, Evan Mobley can turn the corner because his man is set. The guard is setting a screen on the big forward who's not going to navigate the screen well, and he's going to get downhill. One of two things is going to happen: either the forward's going to die on the screen. Now Evan Mobley's going to the rim, or two, the forward's going to have to go way under the screen. Now Evan Mobley can get a runway, either to take a pull-up jump shot, which he's making more frequently this year, or to get ahead of steam so that he can get deeper post position for his little short hook shots and floaters over the top, right? That's the first part of it. But the second big part of it is like getting the defense in rotation. Like if the defender hedges, like in the Knicks game, for instance, in the early fourth quarter stretch, they were spamming like a horn set where they were having Merrill set that inverted screen for Mobley and then popping out to the three-point line. They got a wide open three for Georges Niang out of that because Mobley drove on the hedge, flipped it back to Merrill, rotate, wide open three to Georges Niang in the corner, and he knocks it down. And the most important thing here is it gives them variety that they did not have in the past. It's leveraging Evan Mobley's strengths, and Evan Mobley has some weaknesses, right? Like we've talked about this a lot. Scoring on the roll has been a little bit of an issue for him over the years, and finishing at the rim, if anything that's not a dunk, has been an issue. But like he's kind of a decent jump shooter. And then two, he like is pretty good at playmaking off the bounce. And so you're leveraging those specific gifts with those inverted actions. And most importantly, it's adding variety to your offense. This allows Donovan Mitchell to conserve energy. That Knicks game, Evan Mobley, they ran that action 3-4 times in a row to start the quarter. That allowed Donovan Mitchell to basically just spot up on the right side of the floor. Then when that action started to get controlled a little bit by the Knicks, then Donovan Mitchell started hitting the Jets, and he had like a lot more burst. He had this like crazy just one-on-one drive on Mikal Bridges where he got all the way to the rim and laid it up. Like that makes Donovan Mitchell's job easier because he doesn't have to do as much, and he could pick his spots more and be more athletic when he's actually picking his spots. Then all of a sudden, Darius Garland checks in. Darius Garland had one of his best games as a pro against the Knicks, and he just eviscerates the Knicks with a bunch of downhill burst and over-the-top shot making. And so, like, again, that's the beautiful thing, though. Offensive variety is the key to matchup versatility. A lot of teams have a lot of guards that guard guards well, and then there are a lot of other teams that have a lot of excellent front court defenders. It's exceedingly rare for a team to have elite defenders at every position. And so when you've got Darius Garland, who brings a certain type of style to the guard position, and Donovan Mitchell, who brings a different type of style to the guard position, and then Evan Mobley, who brings the ability to generate some offense by getting the defense in rotation and scoring a little bit for himself in these inverted actions, you just add more variety so that you can cater whatever you're doing to the opponent that you're playing. That is what gives you that matchup versatility. But so those are the three main things that are really turning things around for the Cavs this season. They're just playing so much faster. They're doing more switching, which is allowing them to force more turnovers, which, by the way, they are leveraging into more transition scoring. And then three, a lot more involvement of Evan Mobley in the offense. Some still early in some really tough games coming up for the Cavs. They play Orlando next. That's a tough matchup for them because they do have really good front court defenders and really good guard defenders, and they have a lot of size to look to attack the smaller Cleveland perimeter players. That's going to be a tough one. Then they go to Milwaukee, and then they play Milwaukee again at home. I actually like Cleveland's matchup with Milwaukee because Milwaukee's another team that is lazy and slow, and so they should just be able to cook them in transition. I wouldn't be surprised if they go 2-0 in those two games, but we'll see. Then they go to New Orleans to play the Pelicans, who've been really struggling to start the year. Then they play the Golden State Warriors, which will be another really interesting type of matchup because they do have Draymond Green to leverage against someone like in Evan Mobley, but also have the guard defenders to hang with Cleveland's guards. So we're going to learn a lot about the Cavs roster over the course of the next 5 games. All right, let's move on to our mailbag. I had a bunch of questions around this kind of theme, but I just picked one for you guys. What is it with the all-knowing talking heads who keep insisting that teams have to trade away a bunch of highly promising players in order to become competitive? We heard the same thing from endless sports commentators about the 2022 Warriors. Let's not forget that the Warriors came within a hair's breadth of trading Clay for Kevin Love, and that they tried and failed to trade Steph for Andrew Bogut. And now, here you are, almost raving about how much better the Warriors are this season than you expected, but still insisting that they get rid of several players in exchange for some magic bullet, even though the season is only 4 games old and no one knows just how good this incredibly deep team will be, or what the ceiling for some of their younger players who just keep getting better every year drives me crazy. But I had dozens of Warriors fans complaining about the idea that I say that they need a trade. Couple of things. First of all, you're right. It's only been 4 games. So I'm not saying they should make a trade right now. I think it's a deadline deal. Like you wait till the deadline. Because here's the thing. If you get 50 games under your belt and Buddy Hield is like still averaging 20 something points per game and shooting in the high 40s from 3, then maybe it is that Steve Kerr unlocked Buddy Hield and there's your secondary shot creator. Like, let's see. It's only been 4 games and he's shooting over 50% from 3. I have a hard time believing that's going to stay that hot throughout the remainder of the season. No one shoots high volume mid 50s from 3, not in the history of the league, right? So there's that element to it. 2, you don't know what stars are available yet. You got to wait to see what it is. But there's a very specific reason why I've been advocating for this. First of all, this is not the 2022 Warriors. The 2022 Warriors had Jordan Poole, a better version of Andrew Wiggins, and Klay Thompson. All 3 of those guys are better offensive players than anybody on the Warriors roster right now, not named Steph Curry. Now, again, we'll see if Buddy Hield just suddenly transforms into an all-star level guard, then we need to have a different conversation. But now you're leveraging 4 games of evidence versus, Buddy's been in the league a decade or close, or something like that. So, let's wait to see more before we jump on that boat. But, there's a very specific reason why I've been talking about this. I broke it down for you guys the other day, but the Warriors, their secondary and tertiary shot creators are not nearly at the same level as the rest of the Western Conference. There's been a very specific thing that has taken place over the course of this year. They've beaten the shit out of bad teams. And by the way, the Pelicans, they made a trade where they sent out 2 high-level role players in Larry Nance and Dyson Daniels to Atlanta. And they got back DeJounte Murray, an all-star level guard, who hasn't played yet this year because he's hurt. So, they're a team that is in a crisis of talent at this point. They're nowhere near as good defensively as they were last year. They were supposed to get this offensive boost. They haven't gotten it yet. It's a good win. They're quality wins. If you win down players the way you have against the Pelicans, Warriors fans should be through the roof ecstatic. I'm not trying to undercut that. But what I'm saying is you're not playing that limited version of the Pelicans when you get to the postseason. There are better teams out there. You guys have played one really good defense so far this year, the Clippers, and your offense stalled out and you lost. Even when Steph got hurt, you were down double figures. So, that's kind of the main thing that I'm getting at here. The Warriors have demonstrated through the 4 or 5 games or whatever they've played, they've demonstrated that they have an extremely high floor. And that will beat the injured Pelicans and the Blazers and the Jazz, and that's going to beat the shit out of all the bad teams in the league. I've said that from the beginning. I am very, very confident in this Warriors team ability to maintain a good record through just a very strong institutional basketball character and lots of speed, like we've talked about so much. I think they're going to win plenty of games. That's not the issue, but you will play better teams. The Western Conference is stacked with really good teams, really good defenses. The Eastern Conference has really good defense. You guys are going to play the Celtics here in I want to say less than a week. So there's a lot more to this journey than we've seen to this point. And all I'm saying is you're uniquely equipped. You had no Wiggins, no DeAnthony Melton, no Steph, and you beat the Pelicans. I didn't watch last night's game, but I watched the first one of the 2. And I think all 3 guys were out again for that one. But the point is you're deep. You can afford to lose a couple of guys. Jason, I don't want to trade Kuminga or Moody. Fine, don't trade Kuminga or Moody. Trade different guys and include draft compensation. Whatever it is you want to do, that's fine. But you have 13 rotation players, and you have this incredibly high floor. You have some assets, draft assets that you can send out in a deal. And right now, you need a more reliable secondary shot creator if you're going to hang with the better teams in the West. I am super optimistic about this Warriors team in the big picture because of how high their floor is. But I don't think they have enough offensive talent to truly hang with the top teams in the league. So then again, you got to ask yourself what you want. If what you want as a team is to be the feisty young team that plays super hard and wins against all the bad teams, cool, but then there's not a very high ceiling there. And like, I know, like, guys, this is not the 2022 Warriors. That's not what this team is. The 2022 Warriors had more firepower than this team. Steph was a better version of himself. Clay was still playing at a pretty high level at that point in time. Andrew Wiggins was the best. It was the best season Andrew Wiggins ever had in his entire career. Like, Jordan Poole got a $30 million annual deal out of what he did in that season. So, like, let's just be real for a second. Like, this team is very deep, tons of hardworking role players. They're young, they're fast, they're feisty. There's a lot of good, but they've been beating up on some bad teams. I think if they want to contend, if that's what you got to ask yourself, do you want to contend? Because if you want to contend, Steph needs a number 2 that he can count on night in and night out to give him 20 plus points without fail, efficiently, and in a way that actually fits well with their core lineup. So the Jonathan Kuminga stuff, like, he had a stretch last year where he scored 20 plus like a bunch of times in a row, but it's like, do they trust him on defense? Do they trust him when Steph is on the floor, when they're really running their offense? Do they trust him not to make stupid decisions, right? Like, that's kind of the thing that I'm talking about. I don't know what that player is. I'm not saying you make that deal now. It's a deal for February. But if this team, the exciting thing is you have 13 rotation players. You can afford to package 3 rotation players and draft compensation to somebody else for a high-level player that will then bring you back a deep team that has Steph and a legit number 2 and a much better chance to contend this year. That's the type of question you got to ask yourself. Again, let's see what happens. We'll see. If guys, I'll be right there with you. If you start beating the shit out of the good teams too, if you beat Boston and you beat Denver and you beat Oklahoma City and it's just like, oh my goodness, this is something special here. Yeah, I'm not going to be advocating for a trade anymore, but I'm saying I don't think that's going to happen. This is a really exciting story, but there are a lot of teams that have a lot more firepower in the NBA than the Golden State Warriors, and when they run into them, their offensive limitations, I expect, will show, just like they did in the Clippers game earlier this year, which is the one really good defense that they've played to this point in the season. Hello, Jason. Who do you think might be the next Derek White or PJ Washington that can help a contender reach the finals or win a title in 2025? This is an interesting question. And so again, we're looking at guys here that are like good defensive players that can guard multiple positions, but that are also useful within the context of a team offense. And the 4 names that I wrote down, and there's probably a bunch more of these. I just wanted to come up with some off the top of my head, but Bilal Coulibaly with Washington had an amazing game last night, did an incredible job defensively on Trae Young. That's the type of guy that like legitimately just does so much dirty work that he just raises the floor of your team substantially. Ryan Dunn, and we talked a lot about with the Phoenix Suns the other day. Cason Wallace is another guy with Oklahoma City. His unique ability to really guard the ball, but also be this like kind of cog in an offense that can shoot, screen, cut, finish around the rim, all that stuff. And then Dyson Daniels is another guy who's been doing a really good job for the Atlanta Hawks. I think all 4 of those guys are guys that I'd keep an eye on as guys that'll play big roles on really good teams in the future. Lots of Laker-related questions. This was a question about I want to say this was the Cavs game. This game was a hard watch, not going to lie. D'Lo kept getting burned all game. Transition D was embarrassing. No one was boxing out or grabbing rebounds. I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt because it's a new system, but we'll see if they can get it together. So, really ugly game for the Lakers last night. I, too, am trying to cut them some slack in the sense that it was your fourth game in 6 nights. You're traveling across the country. It was less than 48 hours of rest because they went from a 7 p.m. game time to a 4 p.m. game time in Pacific time, right? So you're turning around really quickly with travel. Yeah, LeBron is old. That's a lot of basketball for an old guy to play in a short period of time. And they've been really sharp for the other 4 games. So like I'm trying to cut them some slack too, but I'm not going to lie. That was a pretty depressing performance in Cleveland. It looked like the team from last year in December where there was like almost like a lifeless quality and an unwillingness to fight. But I'm trying to just crumple that game and throw it away. And the main reason why is because there literally wasn't a single Laker who played well. Anthony Davis played like he's been playing like the best player in the world for the first 4 games, played so bad yesterday. Jared Allen whooped his ass. There was this weird play in the first half where Jared Allen accidentally caught him in the face with his forearm, and AD just like from that point forward just like mentally checked out of the game. Like, it was crazy. And then LeBron James, like, he put up box score numbers, but I thought he was really bad in this game. Austin Reeves was really bad in this game, was throwing the ball away all over the place. D'Angelo Russell, once again, just not hitting enough shots to justify the fact that he's getting relentlessly attacked on defense every single time down the floor. It's his third straight game where he just got absolutely barbecued. Rui had a rough game as well. Once again, still trying to dunk on everybody underneath the basket, which isn't working. There was a lot of stuff with their spacing that was off. Everyone was like, oh, Dalton Knecht, he had 18 points. I thought Dalton Knecht was awful in the times when the game was actually within reach. He's played 2 really bad games in a row. Everyone played poorly. There wasn't a single Laker I could point to and be like, he played well today. And usually that is. Usually you drop a game on the road and it's like, well, hey, so-and-so had a good game. This other dude off the bench played really well. Like, no, every Laker played poorly. So I'm trying to just crumple it up and throw it away. Here's the thing. Like, this is part of basketball, right? Like, the Lakers are not as good as the Boston Celtics, to be clear. But the Boston Celtics, similarly, went into Indiana yesterday and found themselves down 20 plus, right? Like, that's the NBA is so good, and there's so much talent, and teams are so fast now, and they play with so much pace because all the coaches have figured out that you want to play with pace, that, like, you show up on the road in front of a raucous crowd and they're playing hard, it's like a buzzsaw. It's really, really hard to win those games. And so, like, the thing is, though, is Boston can afford, because of their talent level, to have a certain amount of lackadaisical performances that pop up from time to time. And even in that game, they sent it to overtime. They had a good chance to come back and win that one, right? But, like, for the Lakers, you're not as talented. You have to be super sharp. You have to establish really good habits throughout the season. So I'm okay with what happened last night as long as that's few and far between. Like, the personnel limitations on display, like the D-Lo just constantly getting attacked, that's a real problem. They're going to have to figure that out. We'll talk about that a little bit more here in a second. But, like, as a matter of fact, I got another question here. What do you think about Rui Hachimura's contributions this season? All last season on the Lakers Nation preseason podcast, you seemed really low on Rui. Now we needed to upgrade those 2 wing spots between Austin at the 1 and LeBron and AD at the 4-5. Has Rui's performance throughout the start of the season changed your mind? I think that they're fine at that position with the development of Rui over the course of this year, but that 2 spot desperately needs to be upgraded with a real athlete that can guard. Austin Reeves can't guard Donovan Mitchell. It's too much to ask. He needs to guard a Darius Garland level offensive player, right? You need a real athlete to put in that specific situation. You can't have a defender on the floor that every single time the offense puts them in an action, they get a bucket or a foul out of it. That's what they're getting with D'Lo right now. It's a huge problem. So there are some personnel weaknesses that the Lakers need to address. But sometimes you just have a shitty night in the NBA, and I thought that's what happened to the Lakers last night. The key is they need to be few and far between. I want to see them go into Toronto, take care of business. Go into Detroit, take care of business. Go get a win in Memphis. No one's going to give a shit that you had a bad night in Cleveland. It's about that being the exception and not the normal thing that you're running into. All right, two last questions, both from the same guy, just actually more on a personal level with me. When you play basketball, what's usually your role on defense? Are you a point of attack perimeter defender, a wing defender? Or are you considered a big at 6'6", since there probably isn't that many big guys? So on my men's league team, we have a lot of guys who played Division I, overseas professionally, things along those lines. And we have a big guy on our team named Aaron Anderson who played professionally overseas, and he's about my size. And he played big his entire career. So, like, fortunately with that group, I get to leverage more as a perimeter defender. I am at my best guarding on the perimeter because I have really long arms and I can move my feet pretty well. But, like, typically when I go play pickup, I almost always have to guard the big, just because, like you said, there's just not that many big guys in the city, and I weigh 230 pounds, and so I'm just the best option to throw at people like that. But, like, on defense, like, when I was at Arizona Christian my last year, this is how I stayed in the rotation. I was a scorer in junior college and averaged double figures and had a bunch of 20-plus point games, and I had a career high over 30. But, like, that was at a lower level of basketball. And then I went to play NAIA, and I was playing with 2 All-American guards, and I was not good enough to get action run for me. And all the action was being run for the guards for good reason. They were much better basketball players than me, right? Or at least they were certainly better offensive basketball players than me. And so I the way I stayed in the rotation on that team was I just became the team's best wing defender. And so like I just watched a bunch of film on every single guard that that we would be playing in any particular game and try to figure out their tendencies. And I just really channeled my abilities in the direction of perimeter defense. And I was actually able to maintain a role on that team within that context. That's always been like, I would actually argue when I was in college, that was the one thing I was really, really good at. Even when I scored, a lot of it was like bad team scoring. Like I could shoot, but I was very, very streaky. So I'd have games where I shot super well and scored a bunch of points, and then I'd have games where I couldn't make shit, right? So like that was kind of fool's gold in a lot of ways. I was a limited ball handler and I didn't see the floor well when I was younger. So like, even though I had a bunch of big scoring games, I was a limited offensive player at that point in time, but I was big, I was athletic, I could guard. That was like the one thing I could really do at a high level when I was in college. Now that I've gotten older, I'm so much better on the offensive end of the floor, and I've developed a lot in that way. But when I was in college, that was the way that I was deployed. Last one, what's your vertical jump? So I was 205 pounds when I was playing in junior college, and I was freaky athletic, like elbows above the rim, freaky athletic. But then I had a foot injury, and when the foot injury happened, I spent the entire rehab doing upper body lifting, and I put on like 20 pounds of muscle. And when I came back, I was still a very good athlete, and it was worth it because I'm a much better basketball player because of my strength, but I kind of lost that like crazy over the rim ability. I'm still a good athlete. Still to this day, I can jump and dunk pretty well. But like every once in a while, I'll see a video of me when I was younger, before the foot injury playing, and I'm like, holy shit, because I was just skinny and I had super long arms and I could like just fly in a way that I can't at this point in my life. But the big thing is I'm 33 now, and like I'm about to go play basketball later today, and like we'll see how I feel. Like I went out there on Tuesday, I wasn't feeling great. Like it's always like on any given day, I might feel great, I might feel absolutely terrible, but that's just kind of the journey as you start to put the miles on. All right, guys, that is all I have for today. All of the concepts I talked about today, I clipped 6 different clips, but it's just not enough for a Timpf's Tape episode, so I'm going to save that for tomorrow. So tomorrow we'll do some game breakdowns. We'll do another Timpf's Tape. As always, I sincerely appreciate you guys for supporting the show, and I will see you then.